Everyone is still reeling from the most recent school shooting. Of course, it took almost no time for the pundits and politicians to start raging at each other over gun control. And just like clockwork, the leftist media is already wallowing in the toxic masculinity narrative that forms the foundation of their raison d'etre. We've already been bludgeoned by the media with the fact that this shooter was a young male. Male sounding more and more like an epithet than a description. Even as I speak, a gaggle of feminist clones are hammering keys for their next HuffPo or salon piece on evil men, as though they really think there is any other kind of man to be found. Perhaps Michael Kimmel is going to seize the opportunity to spew more bilge about men and aggrieved entitlement, or perhaps not. Shooter Nicholas Cruz's Hispanic surname makes this Valentine's Day massacre fall one short of the leftist feminist holy trifecta of masculinity, guns, and whiteness. But hey, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, and when all's said and done, the feminists have one valid point, even if they tripped over it in the darkness of their own thoughts. Mass shooting is a men's issue. Almost without exception, if someone goes into a workplace or school or public event and starts spraying bullets into the crowd, the chance that the offender will rightly be called the trigger man is almost absolute. And that, of course, is the only time it is permissible to talk about men as a homogeneous group, when they do something wrong. The minute that conversation crosses the line into what men need, the earplugs, wagging fingers, and accusations of privilege come out to ensure no real discussion like that will take place. Still, now that we've identified this kind of tragedy as being male-dominated, where do we go from here? And how do we get there without letting on that we have empathy for men? What do we want to do with the observation that this is a men's issue, assuming we don't want to go down the leftist feminist dead-end road of toxic masculinity with its prescription to force-feed feminine characteristics to boys? Wait a minute. To tell you the truth, it doesn't feel totally genuine of me to just point at the lefties and their highbrowed, low-intellect ideas on how to build utopia. After all, when I look at the right, the only things they seem capable of doing after mass shootings is defending assault rifles and reminding us that Jesus likes the Second Amendment. Well, that, and they remind us that guns themselves don't cause mass murders, like they're on to some sort of special secret wisdom with that. But as true as that is, it's still not very impressive. Lots of things don't cause mass murders. And besides, when you hear a conservative invoke the Second Amendment before the bodies are cold, you're likely to also hear them follow that up with some really ignorant blather about movies or video games. It's like, guns don't kill people, but Grand Theft Auto does. So the left and the right keep arguing across the full spectrum of stupidity, and the bodies keep piling up. And of course, when it comes to things that might or actually do contribute to young men going that far off the rails, things get stickier. Call me crazy, but mental health has a pretty good chance of being a relevant issue when discussing people doing crazy things with guns. The thing is, it also tends to be a dead-end discussion in pundit land, as well as anywhere else that matters. Mind you, pundits are already chiming into the discussion with the obligatory statement that we need to look at this as a mental health problem, even though they don't know anything about mental health. They usually make some equally obligatory and officious declaration that we need more mental health services available, even though they don't understand mental health services any more than they do mental health. But still, they make their ignorant proclamations because, well, without ignorant proclamations, most pundits would not have anything to do. Then, after a short, awkward silence follows their empty proclamations, the conversation will quickly go back to gun control, or even the more pathetic toxic masculinity debate. The reason for that is simple. If we accept that mass shootings are a men's mental health issue, then it would force us to dedicate money specifically to helping men. And that is not going to happen. This is what makes the feminist toxic masculinity a more palatable model for public consumption. We live in a world where men don't have problems, men are problems. Subsequently, we don't help men. We just try to make the world a safer place in spite of them. It's a status quo that is quite comfortable for both sides of the American political aisle. But under this model of invisible male problems, we won't even get close to identifying what is driving so many of these shootings. Think of it this way. Despite a 4-to-1 ratio of men to women in suicide, you still don't see any focus on suicide as a men's issue. And it is probably a good thing you don't. If suicide was widely recognized as a primarily male issue, funding for crisis intervention would evaporate overnight. Public interest in the subject would be even less than what it is now, which is low, primarily because it is mostly men dying from it. We won't see much legitimate research and effort put into the matter of mass shootings for the same reason that funding for prostate and testicular cancer don't reach a fraction of what is raised for breast cancer. It's because the targets of the research are men. And if we dedicate research to men, it can place us at imminent risk of trying to help them. As a culture, we are averse to anything helping men as a group. So averse, actually, that we will live with the occasional school full of dead children as a trade-off. If you think that is cynical or extreme, you haven't been paying attention. School shootings are escalating in number, right alongside our boys in school doing continually poorer in most every way that we measure them. The result of that knowledge so far has been more girl power programs. So, we can only speculate about what drives mass shootings like the one we saw in Florida on Valentine's Day. We do know that Nicholas Cruz is thought to suffer from autism, and we know that there's a significant statistical link between mass shootings and autism spectrum disorders, which was briefly brought to light after the Sandy Hook school shooting that took the lives of 28 at the hands of the autistic Adam Lanza. This caused a bit of an uproar by some with autism who did not want the disorder stereotyped as inherently dangerous. And already this time, the Autism Society, linked below, has issued a statement asking people not to identify autism with violence because of this likely autistic shooter. As it turns out, I'm informed by someone in the know, that advocacy for autistic is overrun by the social justice crowd. They are more concerned with protecting feelings than lives, even at the expense of the truth. Why they are doing this is more political than psychological. According to the research of 239 killers studied, 67, or just over 28%, had definite, highly probable, or possible autism spectrum disorder. Consider that compared to the reality that only 1% of the general population is autistic. Also of interest in the research is that of the 239 killers in the study, 21% or 51 of them had definite or suspected head injury. And even though we don't have a firm definition of the terms possible or suspected, it still leaves us with two groups, alongside males generally, who are vastly overrepresented in the mass murdering demographic. Anecdotally speaking, I went back over 40 or so school shootings since 1990 and found a high incidence of fatherlessness in shootings that were done by male students. In a culture obsessed with matters of sex and how sex relates to an entire host of social issues, you might think just peeking at the records for any correlation between absent fathers and, I don't know, guys spraying crowds with fire from automatic weapons would be a good idea. I mean, just saying. Nicholas Cruz's father, for instance, died when he was much younger. Adam Lanza's father was absent via divorce from the mother, who had custody. Part of the problem here, though, is that raising a stink and getting offended over talking about the correlation between autism and mass murders won't do us any more good than getting offended over talking about the correlation between murderers and single mothers. I'm not extra cautious or hypervigilant about people on the autism spectrum or about men from single mothers. I'd just like to try to understand what is causing these killings and what can be done about it in a way that doesn't end up at a dead end, with some feminist nitwit talking about toxic masculinity or Sean Hannity talking about video games and Hollywood. Autism, head injury, and fatherlessness seem like a really good place to start. Maybe if we can put the bulk of our distaste for helping men on hold for just a little while, we might find some answers we can live with, and that our school children can live with as well. And that is it for today's talk. As always, I hope you've enjoyed, and we'll see you next time.